Lisa had always been different, and she knew it from the time she could walk. Actually, walking was exactly the problem. Born with a condition that made her left leg weaker than her right, she moved through the world with a unique rhythm that caught people's attention for all the wrong reasons. At 28 years old, she had learned to live with the stares, the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, the awkward silence that followed when someone met her for the first time. She had built her life around staying invisible, choosing jobs and places where she could blend into the background. Her apartment was small but comfortable, filled with books and the soft glow of her computer screen. Every night she sat at her desk doing data entry for a large insurance company. Numbers and spreadsheets became her companions. There were no judgmental looks from Excel files, no whispered comments from database entries. The work was boring, but it was safe. During the day, while most people were rushing to their offices, Lisa found peace in the quiet streets. She discovered the old community theater on Maple Street during one of these walks. The building looked tired from the outside, with peeling paint and a crooked sign, but something about it drew her in. The first time she pushed open the heavy wooden doors, she was struck by the smell of old wood and fabric. Dust particles danced in the streams of sunlight coming through tall windows. The stage was small but somehow magical, even empty. She could almost hear the echoes of past performances lingering in the air. "Can I help you?" a voice called from the back of the theater. Lisa nearly jumped out of her skin. She hadn't expected anyone to be there. A woman in her 50s appeared from behind a row of seats carrying a toolbox and wearing clothes covered in paint splatters. "I'm sorry," Lisa stammered. "I was just looking." The door was open. No need to apologize. "I'm Mrs. Peterson, the theater manager. Are you interested in our shows?" Lisa felt her cheeks burn. "Oh no, I'm not. I don't really go to shows. I was just walking by." Mrs. Peterson smiled warmly. "Well, you're welcome any time. We're always looking for volunteers if you're interested. Nothing fancy, just help with painting sets, organizing costumes, that sort of thing." The idea appealed to Lisa more than she expected. Here was a place where she could be useful without being the center of attention. She could contribute from the shadows, help create something beautiful without having to be seen. "I might like that," she said quietly. And so began Lisa's secret life at the theater. 3 evenings a week after her night shift ended, she would slip through the theater's back door. She learned to mix paints and operate the ancient lighting board. She organized decades of costumes that smelled like mothballs and old dreams. The best part was watching rehearsals. She would sit in the dark balcony, sorting through props or mending tears in fabric, while the actors brought stories to life below. She memorized their lines along with them, felt their emotions as if they were her own. There was something magical about the transformation that happened on that stage. Ordinary people became heroes, lovers, villains. A shy college student became a confident queen. A nervous accountant turned into a charming romantic lead. Lisa began to wonder what it would feel like to step into someone else's skin, to forget about her own limitations for a few hours. But that was just a fantasy. Lisa knew her place was behind the scenes. The actors were kind to her, in the distant way people are kind to helpful strangers. They said hello and thanked her for her work, but she remained on the edges of their world. She was the quiet woman who made sure their costumes were clean and their props were in the right places. Lisa's co-worker at the insurance company was named Tom, and he was the kind of person who found humor in everything, especially other people's discomfort. He worked the desk next to hers and spent most of his time making jokes about their boring job and their even more boring boss. One morning, Tom noticed Lisa seemed more tired than usual. "You look like you haven't slept in days," he said, not looking up from his computer. "What do you do all night? Secret life as a party animal?" Lisa smiled despite herself. If only he knew how far from the truth that was. "I volunteer at a theater," she said, immediately regretting sharing even that small detail about her life. Tom's eyebrows shot up. "A theater? Like with plays and stuff? Are you an actress?" The question hit Lisa like a physical blow. The idea was so ridiculous that she actually laughed out loud. "No, definitely not. I just help with backstage stuff. Painting, organizing, boring things like that." Tom leaned back in his chair, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Come on, you must have thought about it. Getting up there, saying some dramatic lines, making people cry." "Never," Lisa said firmly. But even as the word left her mouth, she felt a tiny flutter in her stomach. She had thought about it. Late at night, alone in her apartment, She sometimes stood in front of her bathroom mirror and recited the lines she had memorized from sitting in the dark balcony. "Well, you should try it sometime," Tom continued, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "I bet they'd let you. Community theaters take anyone, right? They're probably desperate." The words stung more than Tom realized. Lisa turned back to her computer, trying to focus on the numbers swimming across her screen. But his comment planted a seed that grew throughout the day. That evening at the theater, Mrs. Peterson was posting a bright yellow flyer on the bulletin board by the entrance. "What's that?" Lisa asked, though she could read the bold letters from across the room. "Open auditions for our annual charity showcase," Mrs. Peterson replied. "We do it every year to raise money for the Children's Hospital. It's always a nice mix of comedy and drama, something for everyone." Lisa stared at the flyer. "Anyone can audition?" "Anyone and everyone. That's what makes it fun. We get all types. Experienced actors, complete beginners, people who just want to try something new." Lisa felt that flutter in her stomach again. What kind of pieces do people usually do? Anything they want, really. Monologues, songs, poems, short scenes. The only rule is that it has to be 5 minutes or less. That night, Lisa sat in her apartment with a collection of play scripts spread across her kitchen table. She had borrowed them from the theater's library, telling herself she was just curious. But as she read through monologue after monologue, she found herself speaking the words aloud. One piece caught her attention more than the others. It was from a play called Our Town, about a young woman who dies and gets to return to Earth for one day. The character talks about how precious ordinary moments are, how people don't appreciate the simple beauty of being alive. The words felt true in a way that made Lisa's chest tight. She had spent so much of her life watching from the sidelines, afraid to really live because she was afraid of how people would react to her differences. Over the next few days, Tom's casual comment kept echoing in her mind. Community theaters take anyone, right? They're probably desperate. Maybe it was time to stop hiding in the shadows. Maybe it was time to see what would happen if she stepped into the light, even if it meant risking everything safe and comfortable about her carefully constructed invisible life. The audition was still 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to decide if she was brave enough to try, or if she would keep her dreams locked safely in her apartment, never knowing what might have been. The 3 weeks passed faster than Lisa had expected. What started as a wild idea slowly became something she couldn't shake. Every night after work, she found herself in front of her bathroom mirror, practicing the monologue from Our Town. The words felt more natural each time she spoke them, as if they belonged to her. She had made copies of the script and highlighted every line. She knew exactly where to pause, where to let her voice grow stronger, where to let it break with emotion. In the safety of her apartment, she felt like she could really do this. But as the audition day approached, doubt crept in like fog rolling over a harbor. "You're really going through with this crazy plan?" Tom asked on Friday morning, the day before auditions. He had been tracking her progress with the kind of interest people show when watching someone walk toward a cliff. "I think so," Lisa replied, though her voice didn't sound convincing even to herself. "Well, good for you," Tom said, but there was something in his tone that suggested he thought she was making a huge mistake. What's the worst that could happen, right? That question haunted Lisa for the rest of the day. What was the worst that could happen? She could make a fool of herself in front of a room full of strangers. She could confirm every doubt she'd ever had about herself. She could provide entertainment for people who would talk about the woman who thought she could act for years to come. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Lisa's mood perfectly. The auditions started at 10, and she had planned to be there early. Instead, she found herself sitting in her car in the theater parking lot at 9:30, watching other people walk confidently through the front doors. A young woman with perfect posture and flowing hair swept past her car, carrying herself like someone who belonged on stage. A man in his 30s followed, chatting easily with someone on his phone about his upcoming performance. Even the teenagers looked more qualified than Lisa felt. She pulled down her visor mirror and stared at her reflection. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking slightly. The monologue she had practiced so many times suddenly felt foreign in her mind. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "You know these words. You understand this character." But understanding a character in the privacy of her apartment was very different from performing in front of judges and other actors. At 9:50, Lisa finally forced herself out of the car. Her legs felt unsteady, and she noticed her distinctive walk seemed more pronounced when she was nervous. She paused at the theater entrance, watching through the glass doors as people signed in at a table. Mrs. Peterson spotted her through the window and waved encouragingly. There was no turning back now. The lobby buzzed with nervous energy. About 20 people clustered in small groups, some running through lines under their breath, others stretching like athletes preparing for competition. Lisa recognized a few faces from previous shows she had watched from the balcony. "Lisa," Mrs. Peterson approached with a clipboard and a warm smile. "I'm so glad you decided to audition. This is wonderful." Lisa managed a weak smile and signed her name on the list. Her handwriting looked shaky compared to the confident signatures above hers. "You'll be number 15, Mrs. Peterson said, handing her a small piece of paper with her audition number. "We should get to you in about an hour. There's coffee and water on the table if you need anything." An hour. Lisa found a seat in the back corner and tried to calm her racing heart. She could hear muffled voices and occasional applause coming from the theater as each person took their turn. The waiting was torture. She watched as confident performers emerged from the theater looking satisfied, discussing their pieces with friends. A few looked disappointed, but even their disappointment seemed sophisticated, like they were already planning their next audition. "Number 12, Mrs. Peterson called. Lisa's stomach dropped. She was number 15. Only 3 more people ahead of her. A college-aged woman stood up and walked toward the theater with the kind of confidence Lisa had never felt in her life. She moved like someone who had never doubted her right to take up space in the world. "Number 13. Lisa's hands were sweating now. She wiped them on her jeans and tried to remember the opening line of her monologue. For a terrifying moment, her mind went completely blank. "Do you ever look at the stars, Mama, and cry because they're so beautiful?" The line came back to her and she felt a small wave of relief. Number 14, this was it. Lisa stood up, her legs feeling like they might give out. The young man ahead of her disappeared into the theater, and she could hear his voice beginning a piece from Shakespeare. He sounded polished, professional. What was she doing here? She was a data entry clerk who painted sets in her spare time. These people were real performers with training and experience. She was about to embarrass herself in ways she couldn't even imagine. Number 15. "Lisa?" Mrs. Peterson was looking at her expectantly. The moment had arrived. Lisa walked toward the theater doors on unsteady legs. Her distinctive gait felt magnified, like everyone was watching the way she moved. In reality, most people were focused on their own upcoming auditions, but anxiety made her feel like she was under a spotlight even before she reached the stage. The theater looked different from this angle. Instead of the comfortable darkness of the balcony, the stage was brightly lit, and she could see faces in the first few rows. The other auditioners had stayed to watch, a common courtesy in community theater. "Whenever you're ready," called the director from the middle of the theater. Lisa couldn't see her clearly because of the lights, but her voice sounded kind. Lisa walked to the center of the stage, and immediately she heard it. A soft snicker from somewhere in the audience. Then another. She felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized what was happening. They were laughing at the way she walked. For a moment, she considered running. Every instinct told her to apologize and leave before she made things worse. But something deeper kept her feet planted on the stage. "I'm Lisa," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be performing a monologue from Our Town by Thornton Wilder." "A little louder, please," the director called gently. Lisa cleared her throat and repeated her introduction, forcing her voice to carry to the back of the theater. She could feel the weight of all those eyes on her, could sense the curiosity mixed with amusement. She took a deep breath and began. "Do you ever look at the stars, Mama, and cry because they're so beautiful?" The words came out steadier than she expected. As she continued, something strange happened. The character's voice began to take over her own voice. Emily's sadness about how people waste their precious time alive began to flow through Lisa's own understanding of what it meant to live on the edges of life. But her nerves were getting the better of her. As she moved across the stage to illustrate the character's return to her childhood home, her walk became more pronounced. She could hear the whispers starting in the audience. "Is this for real?" Someone murmured, not quite quietly enough. "What is she doing?" came another voice. Lisa's face burned with embarrassment, but she pushed through. The monologue was only 3 minutes long. She could survive 3 minutes of anything. As she reached the most emotional part of the piece, where Emily realizes that being alive is too wonderful to realize, Her voice cracked with genuine emotion. But she wasn't sure if it was Emily's sadness or her own humiliation that was making her voice break. "They don't understand, do they?" she said, finishing the monologue. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then came the polite applause, the kind you give when you feel sorry for someone rather than impressed by them. "Thank you, Lisa," the director said kindly. "We'll be in touch with everyone by next Friday." Lisa nodded and walked off the stage, her legs somehow carrying her even though she felt like she might collapse. As she reached the exit, she heard the explosion of whispered conversations behind her. "Did you see how she walked?" Bless her heart, but what was she thinking? I guess they really do let anyone audition. Some people just don't have any self-awareness. Lisa pushed through the lobby and out into the gray afternoon, the laughter and comments following her like a swarm of bees. She made it to her car before the tears started. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, crying and feeling more foolish than she had ever felt in her life. Tom had been right to question her decision. She had no business thinking she could do this. The drive home was a blur of shame and regret. She had stepped out of her safe, invisible world and been reminded exactly why she had built those walls in the first place. That night, she put all the scripts back in a box and shoved them under her bed. It was time to return to the shadows where she belonged. 3 weeks passed in a fog of routine. Lisa threw herself into her work with the kind of determination that comes from trying to forget something painful. She arrived at the insurance office earlier and stayed later, losing herself in spreadsheets and data that demanded nothing more than accuracy. Tom had stopped asking about the audition after the first few days. Something in Lisa's face when he brought it up told him to leave it alone. She was grateful for his silence even though she could feel his curious glances when he thought she wasn't looking. The theater felt like a closed chapter. Lisa drove a different route to work to avoid passing the building. She packed away the scripts she had collected over the months, along with the dreams that had seemed so foolish in hindsight. "I'm an idiot," she had told herself that first night after the audition, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror where she had practiced so many times. "What made me think I could do something like that?" The voice in her head sounded like every person who had ever made her feel small, every laugh she had endured, every time someone had looked at her with pity instead of respect. By the third week, Lisa had almost convinced herself that the audition had been a valuable lesson. Some people were meant to perform, and others were meant to watch from the sidelines. There was nothing wrong with knowing your place in the world. She was sorting through a particularly boring batch of insurance claims on a Tuesday afternoon when her phone rang. The number wasn't familiar and she almost didn't answer. Telemarketers had been calling all week about car warranties and credit card offers. "Hello?" she said absently, still focused on her computer screen. "Hi, is this Lisa? This is Rebecca from the Maple Street Theater." Lisa's stomach dropped. She recognized the voice now. It was the director who had been kind to her during the audition, the woman who had watched her humiliate herself in front of a room full of people. "Yes, this is Lisa," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to talk to you about something and I wasn't sure if you'd be willing to hear me out." Lisa's mind raced. Why would the director be calling her? Had her audition been so memorable that people were still talking about it? Maybe they needed someone to volunteer for cleanup after the showcase. "I'm listening," Lisa said carefully. "First, I want to apologize for what happened at your audition. Some of the behavior from the other actors was unacceptable, and I should have addressed it immediately." Lisa felt her cheeks burn with the memory. "It's okay. I understand why I know I'm not really actress material." "Actually, that's exactly why I'm calling," Rebecca said, and there was something in her voice that made Lisa sit up straighter. "Lisa, I've been directing theater for over 20 years. I've seen thousands of auditions, worked with actors of every skill level, from beginners to people with professional training." Lisa wasn't sure where this was going, but she felt her heart starting to beat faster. "When you performed that monologue," Rebecca continued, "something happened that I rarely see. Yes, you were nervous, and yes, it wasn't technically perfect, but there was something real in your performance, something honest and raw that most people spend years trying to learn how to access." "I don't understand," Lisa said, genuinely confused. "Most actors are performing emotions. They're showing the audience what sadness looks like, or what joy looks like. But you were actually feeling those emotions up there. When Emily talked about people not appreciating life, you understood that in a way that can't be taught." Lisa stared at her computer screen, the insurance claims forgotten. But everyone laughed. Some people laughed because they were uncomfortable, Rebecca said gently. Real emotion makes people uncomfortable sometimes. It's easier to laugh than to face something that might make you feel vulnerable. There was a pause and Lisa could hear papers rustling in the background. Here's why I'm calling, Rebecca said. We had a last-minute situation with the showcase. One of our featured performers had to drop out. A family emergency. She was going to perform a dramatic monologue and we need someone to replace her. Lisa's grip tightened on the phone. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. I'd like you to consider taking the role. I know it's short notice and I know your audition didn't go the way you hoped. But Lisa, I think you might be exactly what this piece needs. The room seemed to spin around Lisa. This had to be some kind of mistake. You want me to perform in the showcase? In front of all those people? I want you to consider it, Rebecca said carefully. The piece is called Letter to Heaven. It's a 10-minute monologue about a mother who lost her child in an accident. She's visiting his grave on the anniversary of his death, finally ready to say goodbye. Lisa felt a chill run through her. That sounds incredibly sad. It is sad, but it's also beautiful, and it requires someone who understands real pain, real loss, not just the kind of loss that comes from death, but the loss of dreams, the loss of the person you thought you might be, the loss of feeling like you belong somewhere. The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. How could this woman who barely knew her understand so much about her life? I've been watching the audition recordings, Rebecca continued, and there was something in your eyes during that Our Town piece. You weren't just reciting lines about appreciating life. You were speaking from experience about what it feels like to live on the edges, watching other people live fully while you convince yourself that watching is enough. Lisa felt tears starting to form. I don't know if I'm brave enough to try again. I understand that fear, Rebecca said softly. But here's the thing about courage. It's not about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. Lisa looked around the gray cubicle where she spent 40 hours a week, at the stacks of insurance forms that represented other people's emergencies and losses. This was safe, but was it living? Can I ask you something? Lisa said, Of course, why me? You must have other actors who could do this. People who actually know what they're doing. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Do you know what the hardest thing to teach an actor is, Lisa? It's not projection or stage presence or even memorizing lines. It's authenticity. Most people spend so much energy trying to look like they have it all figured out that they forget how to be real. She paused, and Lisa could hear the sound of traffic in the background. You walked onto that stage already broken open, Rebecca continued. Most actors spend years trying to learn how to access that vulnerability, and you brought it with you. The piece we need you for isn't about performing grief. It's about understanding it. Lisa stared out the window of her office building, watching people hurry past on the sidewalk below. Everyone looked so sure of where they were going, so confident in their place in the world. I need time to think about it, she said finally. Of course. The showcase is in 3 weeks. That gives us time to work together, to help you feel prepared. And Lisa, yes? I want you to know that I'm not asking you to do this as a favor to me, or because I feel sorry for you. I'm asking because I think you have something special, and I think this role could be perfect for you. After Rebecca hung up, Lisa sat in her cubicle for a long time, staring at the phone. Around her, the familiar sounds of office life continued. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the coffee machine gurgling in the break room. But something had shifted. For the first time in 3 weeks, Lisa allowed herself to imagine stepping back onto that stage. This time, instead of laughter, she pictured faces in the audience actually listening, actually feeling something because of words she spoke. The fear was still there, stronger than ever. But underneath it, like a tiny flame refusing to be extinguished, was something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. That evening, Lisa pulled the box of scripts out from under her bed. She found the copy of Our Town with her highlighted lines and read through Emily's monologue one more time. Maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe there was something valuable in all the pain and awkwardness and feeling like an outsider. Maybe those experiences, instead of disqualifying her from the stage, were exactly what made her belong there. The phone call had changed everything. Now she had to decide if she was brave enough to change with it. Lisa called Rebecca back the next morning. Her hands shook as she dialed the number, and she almost hung up 3 times before the director answered. "I'll do it," she said before she could change her mind. "I'll try the monologue." "That's wonderful, Lisa. I'm so glad you decided to take this chance." They arranged to meet at the theater that evening for their first rehearsal. Lisa spent the rest of the day at work in a haze of panic and excitement. Every few minutes she would remember what she had agreed to do and feel a wave of terror wash over her. "You look different today," Tom observed around lunchtime. Less defeated." Lisa almost told him about the phone call, but something held her back. This felt too fragile to share, too precious to risk having someone else's doubts added to her own. "Just had some good news," she said simply. That evening, Lisa stood outside the theater for the second time in a month, but everything felt different now. Instead of the crowd of confident actors, it was just her and Rebecca. Instead of judgment, there was possibility. Rebecca met her at the door with a warm smile and a manila folder. "I have the script here," she said, leading Lisa into the empty theater. "But before we start working on lines, I want to talk to you about this character." They sat in the front row, and Rebecca opened the folder to reveal several pages of typed text along with handwritten notes in the margins. "The playwright who wrote this piece lost his own son in a car accident 5 years ago," Rebecca began. "He wrote Letter to Heaven as a way of processing his grief. It's not just a performance piece. It's a real father's attempt to understand how a mother might feel in that situation." Lisa felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. "How can I possibly do justice to something so personal?" "By bringing your own understanding of loss to it," Rebecca said gently. "You don't have to have lost a child to understand what it feels like to lose something precious. We all carry different kinds of grief." They spent the first hour just reading through the script together. The monologue told the story of a woman named Grace who comes to her son's grave every week for a year after his death. She talks to him about ordinary things, what she had for breakfast, changes in the weather, neighborhood gossip. But on this particular visit, she's finally ready to say goodbye. "The beautiful thing about this piece," Rebecca explained, "is that it's not about the big dramatic moments. It's about the small, quiet ways that grief lives in everyday life." As Lisa read Grace's words aloud for the first time, she felt an unexpected connection to the character. Grace talked about feeling invisible in her grief, about how the world kept moving while she felt stuck. She described watching other families at the grocery store and feeling like she was looking at them through glass. "I think I understand her," Lisa said quietly when they finished reading. "I thought you might," Rebecca replied. "Now let's talk about how we bring her to life." The next 3 weeks became a journey unlike anything Lisa had ever experienced. She met with Rebecca 3 times a week, and each session felt like therapy disguised as acting lessons. Rebecca didn't teach her the way Lisa had imagined directors taught actors. There were no voice exercises or lessons about projecting to the back row. Instead, Rebecca asked questions that made Lisa dig deep into her own experiences. "Tell me about a time when you felt invisible," Rebecca said during their second meeting. Lisa found herself talking about middle school, about sitting alone at lunch while groups of friends laughed at nearby tables. She described the feeling of being present but not seen, of taking up space without really existing. "That's Grace's experience after losing her son," Rebecca said. "She feels like she's disappeared from the world of the living." "When you walk down the street," Rebecca asked another day, "what do you notice that other people miss?" Lisa thought about her daily walks, about how she had learned to observe life from the edges. She noticed the elderly man who sat on the same bench every morning, feeding pigeons. She saw the cracks in the sidewalk where weeds pushed through, determined to grow despite the concrete. She watched parents pushing strollers, so focused on their phones that they missed their children pointing at interesting clouds. "Grace sees everything now," Rebecca explained, because grief has made her hyper-aware of how quickly life can change. The more they worked together, the more Lisa realized that Rebecca wasn't trying to turn her into someone else. She was helping Lisa find the parts of herself that connected to Grace's story. "Your walk," Rebecca said one evening. "The way you move across the stage. Some directors might try to change that, to make it less noticeable, but I think it's perfect for this character." Lisa looked up in surprise. "Really?" "Grace is carrying an invisible weight. Every step she takes is deliberate, careful. She's not rushing anywhere because she's not sure where she belongs anymore. The way you move naturally shows that kind of thoughtful hesitation. For the first time in her life, Lisa felt like her difference was being seen as a strength rather than something to overcome or hide. But the closer they got to the performance date, the more the old fears crept back in. Lisa would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing as she imagined standing on that stage again. She remembered the laughter from her audition, the whispered comments, the feeling of complete humiliation. What if they laugh again? She asked Rebecca during their final week of rehearsal. They might, Rebecca said honestly. Some people laugh when they're uncomfortable, when they're confronted with real emotion. But Lisa, I need you to understand something important. Rebecca sat down next to her on the stage, both of them looking out at the empty seats. The people who matter, the people who are capable of being moved by art won't laugh. They'll recognize what you're offering them, which is truth, and truth is always worth sharing, even if not everyone is ready to receive it. Lisa nodded, but the fear remained like a knot in her stomach. 2 nights before the showcase, Lisa called Rebecca in tears. I can't do this, she sobbed into the phone. I keep thinking about how it felt to walk off that stage after my audition. I can't go through that again. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Lisa, can I tell you something about that audition? I've watched the recording at least 10 times since then. You recorded it? Lisa felt mortified all over again. We record all auditions for review purposes. And yes, some people laughed. But do you know what I noticed when I watched it back? There were also people who didn't laugh. People who were genuinely moved by what you were doing up there. Lisa sniffled, trying to imagine faces in that audience that hadn't been mocking her. There was an older woman in the 3rd row who had tears in her eyes during your monologue. A teenage girl who stopped looking at her phone and really listened. A man who leaned forward in his seat when you got to the emotional climax. Rebecca paused, letting that information sink in. The laughter was loud, so that's what you heard and remembered. But the attention, the real connection you made with some people in that room, that was real too. And it was more important than the laughter. Lisa felt something shifting inside her chest, like a door opening just a crack. I'm scared, she whispered. Good, Rebecca said. If you weren't scared, it would mean this didn't matter to you. The fear means you care, and caring is what makes the performance real. After they hung up, Lisa sat in her apartment looking at the script she now knew by heart. Grace's words had become as familiar as her own thoughts. The character's journey from despair to acceptance felt like a path Lisa might be walking herself. Tomorrow night she would step onto that stage again. This time, she wouldn't be trying to prove she belonged there. She would be offering something true, something born from her own understanding of what it meant to live with loss and still find reasons to hope. The fear was still there, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like evidence that she was about to do something important. The night of the showcase arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. Lisa stood in the small backstage area, watching through a crack in the curtain as people filled the theater. The 200 seats were nearly full, a mix of regular theatergoers, families of performers, and curious community members. Her performance was scheduled for the second half after intermission. She had specifically asked Rebecca for that spot, hoping it would give her time to calm her nerves while watching the first half of the show. How are you feeling? Rebecca appeared beside her, carrying a bottle of water and wearing a calm smile that Lisa envied. Like I might throw up, Lisa answered honestly. That's normal. Even professional actors get nervous before important performances. Lisa watched a young man finish a comedy routine to enthusiastic applause. The audience seemed warm and receptive, laughing in all the right places. But comedy was different from what she was about to do. Comedy was meant to entertain. Her piece was meant to break hearts. During intermission, Lisa paced in the small backstage area, while the audience milled around in the lobby. She could hear the chatter of conversations, the clink of wine glasses, the easy laughter of people enjoying a night out. 5 minutes until we resume, Mrs. Peterson announced. Lisa's mouth went dry. She ran through Grace's opening lines in her head for what felt like the 100th time that evening. Michael, it's me again. I know I said I wouldn't come back this week, but I lied. The words felt solid in her mind, like old friends she could depend on. Places. Everyone. Second half is starting. Lisa watched from the wings as Rebecca walked onto the stage to introduce the next section of the show. The theater had settled into that focused quiet that comes when an audience is ready to be moved. Our next piece, Rebecca said to the audience, is a dramatic monologue called Letter to Heaven, written by local playwright David Chen. It will be performed by Lisa Rodriguez. There was polite applause as Rebecca exited, and Lisa felt her legs start to shake. This was it. No turning back now. She walked onto the stage and immediately she could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The stage was set simply, just a wooden bench and a single spotlight that created a circle of warm light in the darkness. But as she moved into that circle, she became aware of the weight of all those eyes on her. For a moment she could hear the subtle sounds that meant recognition was rippling through the crowd. Some people remembered her from the audition. She caught a few whispered comments, saw people leaning toward their companions. But then she sat down on the bench and something remarkable happened. All the noise in her head, the fear, the self-doubt, the memory of past humiliation, simply fell away. In that moment, she wasn't Lisa, the data entry clerk, or Lisa, the woman who walked differently. She was Grace, a mother carrying an unbearable loss. "Michael, it's me again," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I know I said I wouldn't come back this week, but I lied." The theater went completely silent. Not the polite, waiting silence of an audience preparing to be entertained, but the deep, breathless silence of people who recognize they're about to witness something real. "Your father thinks I come here too often. He says it's not healthy, that I need to start letting go, but he doesn't understand. This is the only place where you're still my little boy." As Lisa spoke, she could feel the character taking over her voice, her gestures, her entire being. Grace's grief became her grief. Grace's love became her love. The words weren't lines anymore, they were prayers, confessions, love letters to loss itself. "I brought you those cookies you liked, the ones with the chocolate chips. I know you can't eat them, but I thought maybe you'd remember the smell." Lisa's voice caught on that line just as it had during every rehearsal. But now, in front of 200 people, the emotion felt magnified, more real than it had ever been in the safety of practice. She could sense the audience leaning forward in their seats. The whispers had stopped entirely. Even the usual theater sounds, program rustling, throat clearing, seat shifting, had ceased. "Mrs. Patterson next door asked about you yesterday. She said she still expects to see you riding your bike past her house after school. I told her you're in a better place now, but honestly, Michael, I'm not sure I believe that anymore." The honesty in that confession hung in the air like something fragile and precious. Lisa could feel tears starting in her own eyes, but she didn't fight them. Grace would cry. Grace had earned the right to cry. "I've been angry, sweetheart. So angry that this happened to you, to us. Angry that other mothers get to worry about homework and curfews while I worry about whether I'm forgetting the sound of your laugh." As she moved through the monologue, Lisa became aware that something extraordinary was happening in the theater. She could feel the audience breathing with her, following every word, every pause, every moment of Grace's journey from despair toward something that might eventually become acceptance. Her distinctive walk, which had once made her feel self-conscious, now became Grace's careful, deliberate movement as she navigated a world that felt too sharp, too bright, too full of reminders of what she'd lost. "I see children everywhere now. At the grocery store, at the park, walking to school. And for just a second my heart jumps because I think one of them might be you. Then I remember, and the world gets a little darker." Lisa could hear quiet sniffling from the audience now. In the front row she could see an older woman openly crying. A man in the third row had his hand pressed to his mouth. Even some of the teenagers in the back, who had been checking their phones during the comedy acts, were completely focused on the stage. As the monologue moved toward its climax, Lisa felt herself reaching depths of emotion she hadn't known she possessed. Grace's final realization, that love doesn't end with death, that letting go doesn't mean forgetting, flowed through her with a truth that surprised even Lisa herself. "I'm going to stop coming here every day, Michael. Not because I love you less, but because I love you enough to start living again. You wouldn't want your mom to spend the rest of her life sitting on this bench, and we both know it." The words came out through tears now, but they were clear and strong. Lisa felt like she was not just performing Grace's journey, but somehow completing her own journey toward accepting herself, her differences, her right to take up space in the world. "I love you, my sweet boy. I will always love you. But I think it's time for both of us to go home." The silence that followed was unlike anything Lisa had ever experienced. It stretched for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Then slowly one person began to clap, then another. Then the entire theater erupted in applause. But this wasn't the polite applause Lisa had heard during intermission. This was the kind of applause that comes from deep emotion, from having been genuinely moved. People weren't just clapping. They were standing, many of them still crying, all of them transformed by what they had just witnessed. Lisa stood on the stage, tears streaming down her face, and finally understood what Rebecca had tried to tell her about the difference between performing emotion and truly feeling it. She had offered her own understanding of loss and loneliness to this room full of strangers, and somehow, miraculously, they had received it as the gift it was meant to be. As she took her bow, Lisa caught sight of some familiar faces in the audience. There was Mrs. Peterson beaming with pride. There was the college student who had laughed at her audition, now applauding with tears in her eyes. And in the back she spotted Tom from work, looking stunned and somehow proud. But what moved Lisa most was seeing Rebecca in the wings, not applauding but simply smiling, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had recognized potential and helped it bloom. The newspaper review the next day would call it a transformative performance that reminded the audience why live theater matters. But for Lisa, the real transformation wasn't in the applause or the reviews. It was in finally understanding that her differences, her pain, her years of feeling like an outsider, hadn't disqualified her from belonging. They had been preparing her for this moment all along. For the first time in her life, Lisa had stepped fully into the light and discovered that she had always belonged there,